Day 822 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at the Russian losses as Russia has now reached and surpassed a staggering 500,000 military personnel losses, which are some really serious numbers. Now, pro-Russian naysayers and propaganda trolls alike will tell you the figure is instead about 30 to 50,000, which just boggles the mind, given that if we take a look at any number of locations on the map, for example, Bakhmut or Avdiivka, they each lost about that amount of Russian manpower, for which those pinpoint locations on the map are barely even discernible when looking at the larger map. Now, of course, the Russian Ministry of Defense doesn't publish much at all about their personnel losses in this war, which is pretty much standard practice anyway for a war. Although, it doesn't take a forensic analyst or trained statistician to see that other ministries or departments within the larger Russian government, such as the Ministry of Labor, as an example, requested 230,000 death certificates for, quote, family members of deceased war veterans in Ukraine. Or, for instance, the Russian Ministry of Finance that mentioned a similar higher figure last year, due to the immense pressure it was facing related to its own figures about having to pay out lump sums to families of those fallen in service, to the collective tune of billions or tens of billions of dollars worth. And yet, these figures haven't even included the other Russian government departments that showed a 30% year-on-year increase of disability pension payouts, amounting to 500,000 new recipients. And even then, that figure only showed the increase in recipients for 31 to 59-year-olds. And we've also seen many official reports over time about Russia's shrinking labor force as well, which is more of an indirect metric, but coupled with all of the other reports and data we see, it certainly goes a long way to reinforce the larger picture that these loss figures are very real. And I still maintain that the reality of the situation is far greater than what we've even seen with these numbers displayed, as combined KIA and wounded in action figures amount to well over 1 million soldiers. And that might sound a lot, but bear in mind, the initial Russian invasion put together 190,000 military personnel for the original special military operation. Then, when that didn't work out, there was a later partial mobilization call-up of about 360,000. Not to mention 5 Russian conscription drives, each worth about 130,000 each, none of which should even have been mobilized. But we know from details about bullying and intimidation that reportedly forced many conscripts to sign up for a private contract to go to war. Also add in the bare minimum of 150,000 inmates, and a whole bunch of shadow mobilization as well. And the examples go on, all of which gives additional credence to, in the very least, the figures that you see on the screen right now. But I digress, and we'll move across to the map. As we'll start out in the northeast of Ukraine, as clashes erupted inside of Vovchansk, and indeed continue to, with, for instance, fighters from the Russian Volunteer Corps showing body cam footage as it related to some intense street fighting and close quarters combat. And just so that there's no confusion here, the Russian Volunteer Corps, which is a paramilitary unit of Russian citizens based in Ukraine, is actually fighting against the Russian army in the north. Then we also saw more images of Ukrainian forces still present within the town of Vovchansk, showing their continued presence within the area. And so as for this region, more specifically, one of the major holdups for the Russian forces stationed here is due to them getting halted by the first line of defense as created by the AFU. And many analysts surmise that Russia may need a new wave of mobilization by late 2024 to achieve its military goals within Ukraine. Now, what military goals those exactly are is anyone's guess. But of course, Russia would take all of Ukraine if it could. Though, in the least, Russia would certainly want to take the rest of the Donbass and create a buffer zone between itself and Ukraine in the north as well. All to allow their version of peace to really happen, perhaps. But this Russian buffer zone all along the north Which is a ridiculous concept, really, given that if Russia were to somehow obtain that highly sought after new buffer zone between the countries, which in all likelihood would just get subsumed into Russian Federation lands, then sooner or later, Russia would once again just want a new buffer zone to extend on from their old buffer zone. Just a perpetual nuisance that would be. And then looking around on the map, but before we head south, we'll have a look somewhere in the east. So, Ukrainian soldiers from the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade destroyed a Russian T-90M tank by means of 3 FPV drones. And with a total combined cost of around $1,000 to $2,000 for the FPVs, depending on their configuration, then turning the estimated $2.7 to $4.5 million Russian tank into scrap metal would have been considered well worth it for those drone operators. So I'd say it's a good thing for Russia that they stopped with any and all production of their supposed cutting-edge T-14 Armata tanks. But then also in the east, and it's not all mayhem and destruction for the Russian T-90M tanks, as in this next example, we see that Ukraine captured another T-90M, Russia's most modern tank. And this would be the 5th T-90M tank that Ukraine has captured, and the 15th or so of any T-90 tank variant. Then, also on the map, we saw the destruction of a Russian BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle with a very impressive barbecue cope cage, which just looks enormous, and yet still, it's nowhere near the biggest ones we've seen. Then also in the east, we saw the destruction of a Russian 2S1 Vozdika self-propelled gun in the city of Avdiivka, this one was, hiding under a tree. Not so successfully. But not to be outdone, we then also saw the destruction of another one of those Russian turtle tanks, this time in the Kharkiv region. And in this instance, for some reason, the barn door was open at the back, allowing for the AFU drone to simply fly right in. The event was like a Dutch oven or a crockpot. So then we head all the way over to the Kherson Oblast, where there was a big fire after an explosion in Skedovsk. And at a distance of only 65 kilometers or about 40 miles from the front lines, this location was once no stranger to HIMARS attacks. Until the point where Russia realized it became largely untenable for any troop or HQ formations to exist there. Then also just a little bit north of there, and quite a bit of activity in Krinky, as Ukrainian defense forces repelled 9 Russian assaults at the location. Now, previous to this, just a couple of days ago, there was some word that the AFU units positioned here had to move to the west of Krinky to safely maintain their presence on the south bank, which makes more sense with the latest update now, given that, technically speaking, Krinky actually spans quite the narrow but long distance to the west. Then headed much further south, as taking a look at the Black Sea or Crimean waters, as satellite imagery has shown us that new barriers have been installed by Russia in the Kerch Strait, which is part of an attempt to safeguard the Crimean Bridge from Ukrainian maritime drone strikes. Sentinel-2 satellite data reveals the recent deployment of these measures aimed at bolstering the bridge's defenses against potential aquatic assaults launched by Ukrainian forces. But all I can say to this is rockets. Rockets firing from Ukrainian Sea Baby naval drones. Or navigating around it, or aerial drones. And or ATACMS missiles now too. Or there's even the option to send a few of the new heavy hitter 1,000 kilogram payload naval drones, which were said to be in the works with serial production, probably already started. But the thing is, we never really know sometimes until that fateful day occurs, where, without warning, Ukraine shows off its new equipment to the Russian military at large. Which reminds me, as I'm waiting to hear more news to share with you guys about the Ukrainian-developed Toloka TLK-150, which is more stealthy and an unmanned underwater vehicle, which has a periscope-like mast that's used for navigation, surveillance, and communication. And if you think that's frightening enough, there's even the larger TLK-400 and the TLK-1000 variants, with significantly upgraded payload sizes as well. And if you're wondering how the big boy is any different to a submarine torpedo, well, the lines do get blurred just a little bit, But the TLK-1000, for instance, has a much longer range. It has loitering capabilities and a much more highly integrated communication network for surveillance and further manual control, whereas a torpedo adopts a much more fast-paced strike-first, strike-hard approach, with a much shorter range that strikes a target as quickly and effectively as possible. Then on the map, and we'll briefly head far, far north to Estonia for a moment. Because for what might seem like another classic Russian moment, Russian guards unilaterally removed boundary markers from the Narva River between the two countries, sparking concerns and condemnation from Estonian authorities. So this latest incident follows a recently rescinded Russian decree suggesting changes to maritime borders in the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. And so for this latest event, the head of the Estonian Police and Border Guards Eastern Prefecture explained that the buoys or buoys installed annually to ease navigation and prevent accidental border crossings had previously been agreed upon by both sides via actual lines of communication some time ago. However, now Russia has disputed the placement of over half of the markers before removing them without explanation. Estonian authorities are seeking clarification and the return of the buoys, viewing the incident as part of a broader pattern of Russian actions aimed at sowing unnecessary tension in the region. Yep, that's the Russia we know. Then headed across to some news for today. So Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jets, or NATO reporting name Fulcrums, have received a significant upgrade and are now confirmed to carry the US supplied GBU-39 precision-guided glide munitions. So this cost-effective modification equips each fighter with 2 carriage systems, allowing them to carry up to 8 of these weapons each. And with a range of 60 nautical miles or 110 kilometers when launched from high altitude, these GBU-39s enable precise strikes while keeping aircraft at a safer distance. And with a payload of 93 kilograms or slightly larger than your HIMARS GIMLARS rocket payload, they also include optional laser guidance for terminal homing, unlike a HIMARS rocket, making them a big deal for Ukrainian aviation. But add to that, just by contrast to the HIMARS, specifically the GIMLARS rockets, it also has about a 20% range increase over the HIMARS rockets, with a multi-purpose warhead that excels at blast fragmentation and penetrating over 3 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, making it ideal for striking fortified targets. And they've also included upgrades to be significantly more resilient to any electronic warfare jamming, all packed into a lower price per unit, which is about 25% of the cost of the HIMARS-launched GIMLARS rockets. It's impressive. Then to some more news. Germany has delivered its 4th IRIS-T air defense system to Ukraine, according to a report by Der Spiegel. This advanced surface-to-air missile system, also designed and manufactured by Germany, bolsters Ukraine's air defense capabilities and is particularly well suited to neutralizing low-flying enemy cruise missiles. Now, we already knew that Germany was going to send this latest edition and was only announced earlier this month as part of German aid to Ukraine. So that was quick. Having said that, Ukraine is expected to receive about a dozen more throughout 2024, 2025, and 2026. Then headed across to a funny to round it all off today, guys, as time was unusually precious today. So with this one, a Russian army soldier's video upload emerged putting on display Russian naval prowess as they attempt to discover new ways to perform river crossings. And with this guy shaking more than a leaf, adding to the various and almost quite factual memes I've made about the Russian army failing in attempts to cross rivers, simply leading to, I don't think we're going to expect Russian forces to be crossing the Dnipro River anytime soon. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment. I appreciate everything there, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.